AITA for not inviting my mom to my wedding because she hates my fiancé for being short? Mark and I have been together for what feels like a lifetime already. Though it's only been a few years. Meeting him marked a turning point in my life. And from the very start, he's been this solid, comforting presence that's seen me through my best and worst moments. He's one of those rare people who seem to effortlessly make others feel seen and valued. And he's always treated me with so much respect and genuine care that it sometimes still surprises me. We're different, of course. He's a quiet, thoughtful type while I tend to be more outspoken. But we balance each other in the best possible ways. I truly can't imagine my life without him. There's only one problem. And it's not even something I would consider an issue. Mark is 5 feet 4 inches. I've always known it was shorter than most guys I've dated. But it's never mattered to me. To me, Mark's height is just a part of him. A characteristic that's as natural as the color of his eyes or the sound of his laugh. He's thoughtful, quick-witted, and deeply caring. That's what matters to me. But I learned early on that my mom doesn't see it the same way. Somehow, his height bothers her so much that she can't seem to look past it to see the wonderful person he is. From the beginning, my mom made it clear that she disapproved of Mark. Or rather, of the fact that I was dating someone shorter than me. She's a great mom in so many ways. And I know she just wants the best for me. But her opinions on what's best often clash with my reality. In her mind, height is tied to a sense of traditional masculinity. I've heard her say to friends that she wants me with someone strong and tall. As though that's what makes a man worthy. When I first introduced her to Mark, she couldn't hide her disappointment. And I remember the comments she'd slip into casual conversation. You're the one who'll be reaching for things on the high shelf. Or, I thought you'd end up with someone tall. At the time, I brushed it off, seeing it as her way of coming to terms with our differences. But those little remarks never went away. If anything, they only grew worse as time went on. What bothers me most is the subtle way she tries to frame it as concern for my well-being. She once asked, "Aren't you worried about what people might think when they see you two together?" I told her I didn't care about that. But she looked at me like I was being naive. No matter what I say or do, she seems convinced that she knows better than I do about what I need. For a long time, I thought that eventually, she'd come around. I told myself it would get better once she spent more time around Mark and got to know him as the amazing person I know him to be. But the more time passed, the more it became clear that she was holding onto her biases even tighter. Every family gathering became a test of endurance for me, with each new comment and backhanded compliment reminding me that my mom would never see Mark as enough. And I started to see how deeply this hurt him, even if he didn't say much about it. It's painful to think about. I know my mom loves me, and I believe, in her own way, that she wants me to be happy, but it's as though she has this mental image of who I should be with. And because Mark doesn't fit that, she's decided that he can't make me happy. As if her narrow view of love and relationships could ever capture what Mark and I share. She doesn't see the little things. Like how Mark goes out of his way to make me laugh after a rough day or how he encourages me to pursue my dreams. She doesn't know how much joy he brings into my life and how I've never felt more like myself with anyone else. Instead, all she seems to notice is his height. The worst part of all this is that I can feel myself starting to lose patience. I want to believe that, deep down, she'll eventually recognize Mark's worth. But lately, it's become clear that her disapproval isn't just going to fade with time. I'm faced with a choice I never thought I'd have to make. And it's forcing me to confront just how far I'm willing to go to protect the relationship I've built with Mark from the weight of her judgment. And that's the part that hurts most of all. When Mark proposed, it felt like everything I'd been hoping for had finally come true. He planned it perfectly, in a way only he could, personal, thoughtful, and so us. There was no grand public gesture, no fancy setup, just the two of us at the place where we had our first real date. Surrounded by the subtle charm of memories that only we understood. He held my hand, looked me in the eyes, and asked me to marry him. And in that moment, I realized I'd never wanted anything more. Of course, I said yes. For the first few days after the proposal, I felt like I was floating. The ring on my finger felt surreal, like a dream I was somehow living. Every time I looked down, I'd feel this rush of happiness that I didn't know what to do with. I wanted to tell everyone. I wanted to share that happiness with my family. 2. Because, as complicated as things could be with my mom, I wanted her to be part of this joy. Part of me thought, maybe, just maybe, seeing the ring on my finger and the smile on my face would melt away any lingering doubts she had about Mark. Maybe she'd finally realize that he was my choice. That he was the person I wanted by my side for the rest of my life. So, I invited her over to celebrate. I planned a small dinner. Just the 3 of us, my mom, Mark, and me. I'd cooked her favorite dishes. Even set the table with the nice plates she'd gifted me when I moved into my first apartment. I put thought into every detail, hoping it would be the kind of evening where she'd see how much Mark cared for me and how genuinely happy we were together. But as soon as she walked in, I could feel her skepticism. The way her eyes flitted over the ring on my hand. Barely a moment's pause before she looked away. Like it was something to ignore rather than celebrate. The dinner was uncomfortable, to say the least. She'd always had a way of finding polite, pointed questions to ask, and that night was no different. She asked Mark about his career plans in a tone that seemed to challenge his stability. She subtly reminded me of family friends' children who were marrying men with high-paying jobs or prestigious careers. And every so often, there was a mention of height, always subtle but impossible to miss. I suppose you'll have to get creative with photos at the wedding, she said at one point, looking at me instead of Mark. It was mortifying, watching Mark try to brush off her comments while I sat there, feeling both helpless and infuriated. The final straw came toward the end of the night. After dessert, she leaned in close and, in that hushed, concerned tone she always used when she thought she was doing me a favor, said, "Sweetheart, are you sure this is what you want? I mean, he's a wonderful man, but I always pictured you with someone more commanding." The words hung in the air, heavy with judgment and all the implications I'd been trying to ignore. That night, after she left, I found myself struggling to hold back tears. I knew Mark had felt the sting of her disapproval, and I hated that my mom was capable of casting such a shadow over one of the happiest moments of my life. He didn't say much, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. The way he clenched his jaw and tried to stay calm. I could tell he didn't want to add to my stress. But his silence said everything. My mom's lack of respect wasn't just an insult to him. It was a reminder to me that she wasn't willing to see past her own biases. Even for my happiness. In the days that followed, I wrestled with a storm of emotions. I knew I couldn't change her mind overnight. And I understood that people have their own ideas about relationships, however flawed. But I also knew that I couldn't keep subjecting Mark to this. Nor could I keep pretending it didn't bother me. Every time I thought about the wedding, about what should be one of the happiest days of our lives, I felt this heavy cloud looming. I'd pictured my mom walking with me, smiling proudly, sharing in the joy, but now, all I could imagine was her casting judgmental glances or making quiet, hurtful comments at the reception. I was torn. There was no simple solution to this. I'd tried reason, tried showing her that our love was real, that it went beyond something as trivial as height. But my attempts only seemed to fuel her disapproval. As if she'd already decided that Mark wasn't enough for me and was determined to find any justification to hold onto that view. In those quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts, I realized that this wasn't just about a wedding or a single evening of celebrating. This was about my future. The life I wanted to build with Mark, and the question of whether or not I could truly count on my mom to support that. It hurt to even consider it, but I started to think about what it would mean to leave her out of the wedding altogether. I didn't want to hurt her, but I also didn't want to sacrifice my happiness or Mark's dignity for the sake of her misguided standards. It was a decision I wasn't ready to make, but I knew it was coming. And with each passing day, it became harder to ignore the fact that, to protect my happiness and my future with Mark, I might have to make the choice no one wants to make, choosing between my mother's approval and the life I wanted for myself. As the wedding planning inched forward, I found myself constantly bracing for conflict. Each step I took in preparing for what was supposed to be a joyful day only seemed to deepen the tension between my mom and me. My mom's comments went from occasional, sharp remarks to nearly every time we spoke, There was this lingering tension in every conversation we had. And it was exhausting, trying to keep the peace while planning a wedding I could be proud of. A day that would reflect Mark's and my love. I don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point, I realized I was screening her calls more often, preparing myself for the onslaught of concerns she had about the wedding. The wedding dress, for instance, had to be classic and elegant, her polite way of implying she didn't want anything modern or too flattering to Mark's height. And of course, there were her endless thoughts on our guest list, including the suggestion that maybe I could rethink inviting some of Mark's friends from college. According to her, they were a rowdy crowd, but I knew she just didn't like how they supported and encouraged our relationship. One night, my mom brought up the idea of wedding photos. I could already feel where it was going, and I mentally prepared myself for the subtle jabs she'd inevitably throw. She casually mentioned that we should keep the perspective in mind when planning the photos. Then suggested I wear flats instead of the heels I'd fallen in love with. "Wouldn't you want to look more natural next to Mark?" she asked. Feigning concern. I knew it wasn't a genuine question, it was another dig. Each comment like this chipped away at my patience. But I still tried to reason with her, hoping that at some point she would come around. I explained, gently at first, that I loved the heels, that Mark loved me in them, and that our height difference wasn't something that bothered either of us. But she waved it off with that dismissive tone, as though I was being naive. And then there were the constant reminders about Mark's role in the wedding. Every time I mentioned him helping with something or taking the lead on an aspect of planning, she'd make a pointed comment about taking charge, as if I was somehow supposed to steer this entire event alone. The worst part was that Mark could feel it too. Even though I tried to shield him from it, he'd say things like, "I know she's just looking out for you," and "She's your mom. I get that she has opinions." But I could see the way her comments chipped away at him. I began to question if she was capable of seeing Mark the way I did. He was my equal, my partner, the person I respected most in the world. Yet, to her, he seemed like an embarrassing inconvenience, a deviation from the picture-perfect image she had conjured in her head for my future. Each time she'd make a comment, the image of her at my wedding dimmed a little more. I couldn't shake the feeling that she would be there only as a critic, scrutinizing our vows, our photos, our love itself. It all came to a head one evening when she called me, ostensibly to talk about the venue. But the conversation quickly veered off course. She started by casually mentioning that a traditional venue might be more fitting, and then dropped in a suggestion that I consider a smaller ceremony, with only close family. She said it as if it were just a suggestion. But I knew the real intention behind her words. She wanted the wedding to be less about Mark and me, and more about what would look best in her social circle, what would let her save face with people who knew her expectations for my life. For the first time, I didn't hold back. I told her exactly how hurtful her comments had been, that I was tired of feeling like Mark and I had to prove our love or fit into her idea of what a marriage should be. I told her, voice shaking with a mixture of anger and exhaustion, that I was considering not inviting her at all if she couldn't come with genuine support for us both. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture her face, caught between disbelief and offense. When she finally spoke, her voice was as cold as I'd ever heard it. "I'm just trying to protect you from making a mistake," she said, as though her actions were somehow selfless. She went on, claiming that I was prioritizing my infatuation over my family and that I'd regret this choice if I continued down this path. It was like she couldn't even see the person I was, let alone the person Mark was. In her eyes, I was making some reckless decision, blinded by love, and destined to suffer for it. But as she spoke, her words did something unexpected. Instead of making me doubt my choices, they clarified everything. I realized that she wasn't interested in seeing me happy unless it was on her terms. Mark had shown me nothing but love, respect, and partnership. He'd proven, over and over, that he valued me for who I was, just as I valued him. And here was my own mother, trying to undermine that, all because of something as shallow as height. That night, after hanging up, I sat with the weight of what lay ahead. The reality was sobering. I could go on letting her bully me into compromising my happiness. Or I could finally draw a line. One that might permanently alter our relationship. I hated that it had come to this, that a wedding, something that should be a joyful union of two families, had turned into this battle. But I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't unhear the things she'd said or unfeel the pain of her constant judgment. If she couldn't accept Mark for who he was, I wasn't sure I wanted her there at all. As the wedding plans moved forward, I knew I had to confront my mother about whether or not she'd truly support my marriage to Mark. This wasn't just about a wedding day but about her role in our lives together. I couldn't shake the heaviness I felt every time I thought of her being at the wedding if her presence came with judgment and disapproval rather than celebration. A few days after that tense phone call, I decided to visit her at her house. I needed to have this conversation face to face, without any opportunity for her to dismiss me or for my words to be lost over the phone. As I drove there, my stomach churned. I rehearsed what I wanted to say in my head, hoping I could keep my emotions under control and make her understand that her behavior was threatening to tear apart not only our relationship but also the joy I felt with Mark. When I arrived, she greeted me warmly, almost as if the last few months of tension between us hadn't existed. But I wasn't fooled. I could feel the ice beneath the surface, the restrained comments waiting to slip out the moment she had an opening. So, as we sat down in her living room, I took a deep breath and got straight to the point. I need to talk to you about Mark and the wedding, I began, my voice calm but firm. She raised an eyebrow, but her expression remained nonchalant. Oh, what's there to talk about, dear? I need to know if you're going to be there to support me. I mean, really support me, I said, looking her directly in the eyes. If you come, I want it to be because you're happy for me and Mark. But if you can't do that, then I don't think you should come at all. Her face twisted in shock and, almost instantly, indignation. Are you saying you don't want me at your wedding? After everything I've done for you? I could feel my heart pounding. But I held my ground. I'm saying that I don't want you there if all you're going to do is judge Mark and make him feel uncomfortable. This is supposed to be a day about love and celebration, and I won't let it be tainted by negativity. For a moment, she was silent, her lips pressed tightly together. Then, in a low voice, she said, "You're making a huge mistake. You know, Mark might seem wonderful now, but people will judge. They always do. You'll have a life filled with people whispering behind your back, wondering why you settled, and that's not the life I want for you." I felt a flare of anger, but I forced myself to stay composed. I'm not worried about other people's judgments, Mom. And if you truly cared about my happiness, you wouldn't be either. You'd care about the way Mark treats me, about how he makes me feel loved, safe, and valued. That's all that matters to me. She shook her head slowly, almost as if she pitied me. You're blinded by this idea of love. But love isn't enough when people are looking down on you. You deserve a partner who can stand by your side in every way. Not someone you'll always be defending. It stung, more than I wanted to admit. But her words only solidified my resolve. I had tried, over and over, to make her see Mark for who he was. To understand that love was more than height or appearance or social standards. But she was stuck in her narrow view of what a worthy partner looked like. Then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong there, I said, my voice trembling slightly. If you can't see that Mark is worthy of me, then I don't think you really understand what love is. Her mouth fell open, and for the first time, she looked truly taken aback. You're willing to cut me out of your wedding for him? I'm willing to set boundaries, I replied. You're my mother, and I love you, but I love Mark, too, and if you can't respect that, then I have to protect my happiness, even if it means making a hard choice. The silence that filled the room was heavy, almost suffocating. She looked down, her fingers twisting nervously around a ring on her finger, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might relent, that maybe my words had reached her. But then she took a deep breath and looked back up at me, her eyes hardening. I'm your mother, and I only want what's best for you, she said, her voice cold and distant. But if you're going to throw me aside for this man, then I don't know what else to say. You're being short-sighted. I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling a sadness creep in alongside the anger. I realized, In that moment, that she might never see things my way. That she might always see Mark as a mistake, rather than the love of my life. It hurt deeply, but it was a pain I was willing to bear if it meant I could build a life with someone who cherished me. I'm sorry you feel that way, I whispered, standing up, but this is my decision. I'm marrying Mark, with or without your blessing. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door, not giving her a chance to respond. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, and I took a deep, steadying breath. Part of me felt broken, mourning the idea of the mother I'd hoped she could be, the mother who would put aside her judgments for the sake of my happiness. But another part of me felt lighter, unburdened. I had finally said the words that had been weighing on my heart. The words I needed her to hear. And as painful as it was, I knew it was the right thing to do. I was choosing to stand by Mark, to protect the love we had built together, no matter the cost. The thought of going through the wedding without her brought a sharp ache. But I knew that whatever happened next, I could face it. I had Mark, and I had a future to look forward to, a future built on love, respect, and unwavering support. And, in the end, that was what truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into wedding planning with renewed energy, focusing on every detail that would make the day a true celebration of the love Mark and I shared. Though a nagging sadness lingered, I had made my peace with my mother's absence. My decision had come at a price, but I knew it was one I could live with. Friends and family members called, sending their well wishes and asking about the wedding, and the excitement around me was contagious. Mark and I planned a small, intimate ceremony at a cozy venue tucked away in a quiet part of town, with a garden full of blooming flowers. It was the perfect backdrop for a day that was meant to be a joyful celebration, free from negativity and resentment. The wedding wasn't extravagant or flashy, but it was ours, and that felt beautiful and right. However, as the date grew closer, my mother's absence weighed on me more heavily than I had anticipated. Despite our strained relationship, there was a part of me that wanted her there, to share in this milestone and, hopefully, witness the love Mark and I shared. I tried to distract myself by working on last-minute details, and while Mark was supportive, I knew he worried too. One evening, as I was organizing our seating arrangement, I felt the sudden urge to reach out to my mother. I knew I had laid down my boundaries, that I had drawn a line between her views and my happiness. But it didn't make the heartache of her absence disappear. I picked up my phone and hesitated, scrolling to her number. What would I even say? Would she just dismiss me? Or worse, would she confirm that she truly didn't plan to attend? In the end, I couldn't bring myself to call her, so I left her a message instead. I wanted to let you know that the wedding is on the 15th. And if you change your mind, there will be a place for you there. I felt a mixture of relief and vulnerability as I hit send, knowing that the decision to attend was in her hands, but that I had done everything I could to invite her into my happiness. I knew the risk. I knew it was possible she'd ignore it or even call to tell me she wasn't coming. But I needed her to know that, despite everything, I wanted her there. The night before the wedding, I felt a strange sense of calm. Mark and I were preparing for the rehearsal dinner, surrounded by close friends and family. It was a beautiful, intimate gathering, and I could feel the warmth of everyone's love and support. I looked around the room at people who truly wanted to celebrate us, and any lingering doubts seemed to melt away. I knew in that moment that, regardless of my mother's presence, I had everything I needed. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The garden venue was alive with colors and light, exactly as we had imagined it. I slipped into my dress, taking in every detail of the lace and delicate fabric that made me feel both elegant and free. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and nerves, but I was ready to step into this new chapter. As I stood with my bridesmaids, my best friend handed me a note. "This just arrived for you," she said softly. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, recognizing my mother's handwriting. It read, "I may not understand your choice, but I love you. Wishing you all the happiness in the world today and always." It wasn't the heartfelt apology I might have once dreamed of, nor a sudden change of heart. But it was enough. It was a sign that, in her own way, she was thinking of me and maybe even accepting my choice. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to feel the bittersweet comfort of her words. Even if she wouldn't be there in person. The ceremony was perfect. Mark's face lit up as I walked down the aisle. And every worry, every tension, and every painful memory melted away in his gaze. I felt at peace. Our vows were honest, raw, and full of promise, and as I said mine, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. After the ceremony, during the reception, I looked around at the joyful faces, the warmth and laughter filling the air. Mark held my hand, his touch grounding me. In that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice. The happiness, the contentment, and the love that filled that day were worth every difficult decision. Every boundary set, and every moment of heartache. Life might not be easy moving forward, and my mother's absence might always be a quiet ache in the background. But as I took Mark's hand and led him onto the dance floor, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated us wholeheartedly, I felt a sense of freedom and happiness that was all the more precious because it was fought for. The day had been one of love, real, tested, and triumphant, and as I looked into Mark's eyes, I felt ready to begin our lives together, knowing that we had chosen each other, no matter the cost. The high of the wedding day lingered with me well past that perfect night. In the weeks that followed, I held on to every memory, every joy-filled moment, yet, I knew that while our wedding felt like the start of something beautiful, it also left behind complicated feelings. The gap my mother had left, despite her last-minute note, was something I still felt. I knew that her absence hadn't gone unnoticed. Either. The whispers, the polite inquiries, they all spoke to a quiet but persistent question about our family's strained dynamic. My mom's note had been bittersweet, but it also confirmed a truth I had to accept. She wasn't ready to embrace my choices fully. Especially when it came to Mark. Her disapproval over his height might have seemed trivial to others. But for her, it ran deep, entangled with her ideas about success and strength. I could only hope that, over time, she might soften toward Mark and appreciate how deeply he and I cared for each other. I finally decided to reach out to her, unsure of what I expected but feeling that maybe, after the wedding, we could find some understanding. I called her one evening, and she answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting. "Mom," I began, "I just wanted to thank you for your note. It meant a lot to me, even though I missed having you there." There was silence on the other end, and then she sighed. "I was just trying to wish you well, even if I couldn't be there in person." Her words were cautious, layered with the same hesitation that had strained our relationship leading up to the wedding. I knew she felt hurt and possibly even betrayed by my decision not to invite her. But I was determined to keep my focus on reconciliation rather than reopening old wounds. "I know, Mom. I appreciate it. I just hope, over time, you'll understand why I made the choices I did. Mark makes me really happy. And I want you to know that." "Do you, though?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "Do you really feel like this is the best you could do? It's just hard for me to believe he's what you've always wanted." Her words landed like a sting, and I felt the familiar frustration bubbling up inside me. But I reminded myself to stay calm. "Mom, I've had 2 years with Mark, and those years have shown me what it means to be loved without condition. I don't expect you to understand right away, but I need you to respect that." The line was silent again, and I braced myself for another critical remark. But she simply said, "Maybe I'll come around someday." It was all I could ask for. Really, a part of me longed for more, a full embrace, a genuine acceptance, but her words were a start. A glimmer of hope that one day we might find common ground. After that call, I realized that our relationship was on a slow road to healing. It wouldn't be a quick or easy fix, but I felt relieved to know that a part of her still wanted to be part of my life, even if she couldn't fully support my choices. And while her judgment over something as unchangeable as Mark's height still stung, I was learning to separate my life and happiness from her narrow perspective. Mark stood by me through it all, his steady support a comforting contrast to my mother's skepticism. He could see how much I wrestled with the guilt of disappointing her, and he never once resented me for it. Instead, he would take my hand, reminding me that I was allowed to choose my happiness. I was allowed to live free from others' expectations. even my own mother's. With time, I grew more comfortable with this new reality. I found ways to talk about my marriage without needing my mother's approval. Ways to embrace my choices without second-guessing them because of her disapproval. The love I had with Mark became my anchor. And while I would always wish for my mother's acceptance, I learned to move forward without waiting for it. I'd faced the fallout, stood my ground, and come through stronger on the other side. It wasn't the journey I'd expected, but it was mine, and with Mark by my side, I knew I had everything I needed to start our life together. The aftermath of the wedding and my tense conversation with my mother left a mark on me. One that was subtle yet deeply felt. I'd always known that love couldn't be forced or coerced. That family dynamics weren't always what we hoped they would be. But knowing it and living it are two different things. After years of seeking validation from my mother, it felt surreal to finally be carving out a path with Mark without that stamp of approval. It wasn't easy to let go of the longing for her acceptance. But it was freeing, too, in a way I hadn't expected. As Mark and I settled into our lives together, there was an unspoken sense that we were both ready to embrace a fresh start. Our own foundation that we'd build from scratch. He could see that I was working through my emotions. And he supported me in ways I hadn't known I needed. He let me vent when the weight of family disappointment grew heavy. And he'd quietly bring me small comforts, a cup of tea, an arm around my shoulder. His unwavering presence. Mark never pressured me to forget my family's pain. Nor did he try to diminish my mother's importance to me. Instead, he simply stayed by my side, allowing me to process everything in my own way. Together, we began to design the kind of home we wanted. It wasn't just a matter of picking out furniture or arranging our schedules. It was about the life we wanted to build. The kind of love and stability we wanted to foster. I knew that, unlike some families, ours would be one grounded in acceptance and support, with room for imperfections and growth. Still, there were occasional pangs of regret. I missed having my mother fully present in my life. Her approval a distant longing that popped up at unexpected moments. I wondered sometimes if she missed me, too, if she thought about calling me or if she ever questioned her stance. But I didn't let myself dwell on those questions for long. Mark had taught me, through his own quiet resilience, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting or erasing the past. It simply meant choosing to live in the present. To embrace what I had instead of what I wished for. One evening, Mark and I were cooking dinner together in our small but cozy kitchen. We were laughing, both of us covered in flour from a misguided attempt at homemade pasta. And I realized that, for the first time in a while, I felt genuinely content. I didn't feel like I was missing something. I didn't feel the usual ache of needing validation. I had everything I wanted. And it was right here with me. In that moment, I looked over at Mark and felt a surge of gratitude. Not just for him, though he'd been my rock in so many ways, but also for myself, for making the choice to live my truth. Even when it meant risking relationships that had been fundamental to my life. This new foundation we were building together was proof that I was capable of creating the life I deserved. The kitchen was filled with the rich, warm scent of garlic and tomatoes simmering in a pot. The air thick with laughter and love. This was what I had wanted, a life that was real. Built on respect, support, and understanding. It didn't matter that we'd faced obstacles, or that the path here had been rocky. What mattered was that we were here, together, writing our own story without waiting for anyone else's approval. By the time we sat down to eat, I felt a peacefulness settle over me. A kind of quiet confidence that this was only the beginning of something beautiful. Mark looked at me, his gaze soft and knowing. And I knew he understood everything I was feeling without me having to say a word. This was our life. And it was exactly as it was meant to be. We didn't need anyone's validation. And we didn't have to fit anyone else's expectations. We had each other. And that was more than enough. It's been over a year since our wedding. And life has settled into a rhythm I never thought possible. Mark and I have created a life that feels authentic. A home that radiates warmth, acceptance, and a happiness that's been hard-won. Every day, I'm reminded of the choice I made, not just to marry Mark, but to prioritize our relationship in the face of resistance from those closest to me. That choice has continued to shape our lives, guiding us to move forward with gratitude and strength. As time has passed, I've felt a shifting within myself. A gentle acceptance of my mother's absence. My heart no longer clenches when I think of her, though a bittersweet ache sometimes lingers. I used to wonder how long that ache would last. If I'd ever feel entirely at peace with her choice to distance herself from our lives. But I've come to realize that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's finding contentment within it. Allowing space for what hurts without letting it overshadow what heals. Occasionally, my mother sends a message through one of my siblings. Short and impersonal but carrying a flicker of familiarity. As if she's testing the waters without truly diving in. I've stopped hoping for more. Understanding now that reconciliation may not come in the way I once dreamed it would. In her own way, she's trying. And I've learned to accept that as her own version of love. Even if it doesn't look like the kind I'd hoped for. Life with Mark is beautiful. Filled with the kind of joy that isn't grandiose but is steady and certain. We've developed our own traditions. Small acts of togetherness that are as unshakable as they are simple. Sunday breakfasts with coffee and pancakes. Weekday walks through the neighborhood. And late night talks about dreams, life, and everything in between. These are the moments that weave our lives together. Each day a testament to the love we chose and continue to choose. Looking back, I can hardly recognize the person I was, so desperate for approval. So willing to sacrifice my happiness for the comfort of others. Today, I'm proud of the strength I found. The courage to place my love and my values at the center of my life. I know now that family isn't just defined by blood or expectations. It's defined by those who embrace you fully. Who celebrate you as you are. And though I'll always feel a quiet yearning for a closer bond with my mother, I'm grateful for the family I've created with Mark. He's taught me that true love doesn't seek to change or diminish. It only strives to understand and support. We're building a future filled with possibilities. Each day an affirmation of the life we chose together. And as I move forward, I carry with me a sense of peace I once thought impossible. Our path may not be traditional, but it's ours, and that makes it perfect in every way that matters.